Another year has passed, which means it's now time for my annual list of the best films of the year. 2024 was an interesting year for movies, with no shortage of very fascinating and interesting films to talk about. And as always, before we begin, I have a massive list of honorable mentions, which are Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul, Superman: The Christopher Reeve Story, Wicked, Abigail, Piece by Piece, My Old Ass, Transformers 1, Mars Express, A Quiet Place Day 1, Beetlejuice, Wicked Little Letters, Saturday Night, Blink Twice, The Fall Guy, Twisters, Hitman, The People's Joker, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and finally, Furiosa: A Mad Max Saga. And without further ado, here are my top 10 favorite films of 2024. Number 10. Now I know to a bunch of film bros, this is going to look like one of those picks that'll make them say, watch more movies. But I can't help it. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was some of the most fun that I had at the movies in 2024, and was everything I could have wanted a Sonic movie to be. The Sonic the Hedgehog movies just kept getting better and better with each succeeding film, and now with number 3, director Jeff Fowler and his team made the ultimate Sonic movie that is by and for Sonic fans. Sonic 3 is the most Sonic-y Sonic film yet, as the story draws inspiration from one of the most popular and beloved Sonic games, Sonic Adventure 2. It's one of those films that has one job and it delivers. There's a ton of fan service, it balances out its characters extremely well, there's a ton of massive laughs, and the action scenes are awesome. That third act is a Sonic fan's dream come true. Ben Schwartz, Colleen O'Shaughnessy, and Idris Elba are as awesome as ever as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. And Jim Carrey is at his best here, this time playing double duty as both Dr. Robotnik and his grandfather Gerald. He makes both Robotniks two distinct characters, with Ivo still being Crazy Carrey like in the first two, and Gerald having an extra layer of darkness to his history. That dance scene had me in hysterics. The movie also has a surprising emotional core, and that is especially thanks to Keanu Reeves as Shadow. They did a phenomenal job bringing his tragic backstory to the screen, and you understand his pain. Reeves brings a ton of resonance to his performance that makes Shadow both compelling and badass. If we're just talking about pure fun, then Sonic the Hedgehog 3 delivered everything I wanted from a Sonic movie and made the best one yet. Number 9. If I could be honest, this was one of the hardest years for me on an emotional level, especially with the direction that the world is heading. And I can't think of any other film this year that has continued to be timely all throughout the year, and a film that left me shaken to my core more than Civil War. It's a terrifying portrait of a near-future America that now looks even more real. Being a photographer myself, this struck a stronger chord for me. You're putting your life on the line, putting aside your beliefs with complete neutrality, with your only focus being on getting that perfect shot. Going in, I was worried that its neutrality would mean that the movie was too cowardly to say anything, but it actually turned out to be effective and powerful. Writer-director Alex Garland created a film that lets the audience fill in the blanks with whichever beliefs that they want, rather than spoon-feeding them an answer because it was going to be a film that was going to piss people off either way. It is a divisive film by design, as the audience is not given any side to root for. The film Civil War isn't about the titular Civil War, it's the backdrop to a story of the ethics of photojournalism. Seeing the shots interspersed with the action as it's happening and as they're taking the picture is haunting, and the sound design is brutally effective, as those gunshots feel like real gunshots. And this story is told with a phenomenal cast. Kirsten Dunst is excellent as the main character, Lee Smith, as she shows how this line of work hardens a person. Kaylee Spaney is fantastic as Jessie, a young aspiring photographer who idolizes Lee and gets her first experience in the field. And over the course of the film, we see her naivete get put to the test when she throws herself into the crossfire with little idea of what she's really getting into. Stephen McKinley Henderson is a highlight in some of the film's quieter moments, and Wagner Moura has some amusing back and forth with the crew in the car amidst the bleakness, which is definitely a contrast to how terrifying he was in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, as death, straight up. This film contains one of the most terrifying scenes I've ever seen in any film, with the scene with Jesse Plemons as a bigoted soldier. That scene had me terrified, uncomfortable, and got my blood boiling as the embodiment of how white nationalists like Plemons' character are some of the most evil people in the world. It's a brilliantly crafted and haunting ode to war journalists and one of the year's most timely films. Number 8. I do not understand what goes through studio CEOs' heads, but there's no one I don't get more than David Zaslav. Every single decision he's made as CEO of Warner Brothers has been some of the most anti-art and anti-creative in the film industry in recent years. From all of the cost-cutting tactics to turning nearly or fully completed films like Batgirl and Coyote vs. Acme into tax write-offs, this man has made so many stupid decisions that it makes me wonder how can any self-respecting filmmaker ever want to work with Warner Brothers. And he made another stupid decision on the release of the latest, and maybe last, film from a filmmaking legend that's released a majority of his films with them. And that is my number 8 pick, Clint Eastwood's Juror Number 2. I don't know why Zaslav tried to bury this by only giving it a limited release, and plus, a Clint Eastwood film being dubbed a Max Original just sounds so wrong. As for the film itself, Juror Number 2 is a harrowing courtroom drama that's everything that you'd want from the genre, and it's also a haunting character study and a puzzle box of people's ethics and morals within the justice system. Jonathan Abrams' script always keeps you on your toes and guessing throughout, as you're also with the characters, second-guessing yourself on the truth of the case. It's not a clear black and white conflict, but a moral gray area. If there's anything that this year has showed me, it's the true colors of the people around me. Good people can do bad things and only seem good as a mask for their dark secrets. Bad people can change and be innocent, but they can also get away with so many horrible actions because people just choose to do nothing about it. And such a powerful story is elevated even more by a fantastic cast. I've said this many, many times, and I will continue to say that even despite his illustrious career, Nicholas Hoult is still one of the most underrated actors working today with his massive range, and this is one of his best performances of his career. You really feel his guilt and doubt looming on him for the entire film, and you don't know how to feel about him and what he should do in this case. Toni Collette is also terrific as the district attorney prosecuting the case, and J.K. Simmons is always a win no matter what he's in. It's a shame that this never got a wide theatrical release, but that doesn't make it any less worth watching. And hey, at least it actually got released, which is more than I could say about some of the other victims of the acts of Zaslav. Number 7. Emotional roller coasters are the big theme of my list this year, and A Real Pain is another one of those that moved me throughout the entire emotional spectrum. It's a film that's as hysterically funny as much as it is brutally honest and heartbreaking. It's a great showcase that Jesse Eisenberg has a ton of promise as a filmmaker alongside being a great actor, as he starred in, wrote, and directed this feature. Though the core of this movie comes down to its two leads. Eisenberg gives his best performance since The Social Network, as he plays his usual neurotic, fast-talking self with a layer of sadness for not just the tour that he and his cousin are taking across Poland about their heritage's history, but how he feels about his cousin over the course of the film as they try to heal their bond. But the one who owns this movie is Kieran Culkin. His performance spans the entire emotional spectrum as he's way more outgoing and carefree, but also has a deeper layer of pain. Culkin is hysterical in his moments of humor with his charm and signature sarcasm, but he reveals another layer to a much more vulnerable side of him, and the pain hits closer to home for him as he was way more close to their recently deceased grandmother. And plus, it's a beautiful showcase for some of the landmarks of Poland that makes me want to go there one day. It's funny, it's honest, it's heartbreaking, yet above all else, it's also heartwarming. Number 6. Will and Harper is a truly wonderful documentary and one of the best that I've seen in a while. It's an honest and endearing story of love, acceptance, and how friendships can evolve. I've always loved Will Ferrell, but now I have even more of a respect for him by doing this road trip with one of his longest friends from SNL, Harper Steele, to see her for who she is after she came out as a trans woman. It looks at the trans experience in a sensitive and thoughtful way. I can't imagine the worry of coming out and the fear that you're not going to be loved when you put what you see as your true self out there, and the fear of hating yourself. And this film made me love Harper Steele for who she is, as she deserves all the love and kindness in the world, as this movie is about her. Will is the hook, but Harper is the focus and the heart of the picture. It's absolutely wonderful in many parts, including a wonderful Kristen Wiig song that plays during the credits. But it also reminds us of the devastating reality that some people out there don't see trans people as real people. They are as real people as you or me. Trans people deserve to be respected, loved, protected, and have access to gender-affirming care. I support trans rights. I see you, and you are not alone. Be like Will and be open to educating yourself. In a world filled with J.K. Rowling's, be a Will Ferrell. Number 5. If I had to pick one film this year that describes the feeling of having your heart ripped out, it would be Memoir of a Snail. 15 years after Mary and Max, writer-director Adam Elliott makes his return with another devastatingly beautiful stop-motion film. It's an emotional roller coaster that I really had to take the time to gather myself after watching it. Elliot expands upon the themes of loneliness that he explored in Mary and Max by telling the often tragic story of two twin siblings from childhood to adulthood as they're separated into different foster homes following their dad's passing, and their trials and tribulations to one day reunite. Grace and Gilbert are both very fascinating characters in their own rights, with what they go through in their separate lives, and tackle some very dark and heavy themes. Elliot's sense of storytelling is endlessly compelling. He balances frank honesty and the dark depravities of humanity by putting you into the ringer with its characters and having a uniquely dark sense of humor. And it all manages to come together in a way that feels very human and heartfelt by the end. Both Grace and Gilbert have really different challenges with their foster parents, as with Grace, she's put into an aloof couple who then leave her by herself and in the care of an eccentric old lady who's had quite the life herself. Grace's side of the story really delves into her loneliness and her struggle to have anyone give her any happiness or hope, and how her obsession with snails appears harmless at first, but we see as the story progresses that it actually eats away at her all throughout her life. Most of the film is told through flashbacks as Grace narrates her life to one of her snails, with a beautifully heartbreaking performance by Sarah Snook. But the parts where the film is at its darkest is with her brother Gilbert, as he's sent to a family of extremely religious apple farmers who constantly abuse him, especially his foster mother, who sees his dreams of becoming a street magician like his dad as satanic. It is a brutal and disturbing commentary on how some use their religion as an excuse to commit the most hateful actions that you can imagine. It's interesting how 2024 was the year that I watched and got into plenty of Australian media, or films and TV set in Australia. Whether they be American films that were filmed and set in Australia like The Fall Guy, or especially animated work from Australia, whether they be dark and emotional like the works of Adam Elliott, or light escapism like Bluey. Well, I guess you could say the Australians have taken over, and honestly, I'm pretty cool with it because they make great stuff. With only 2 feature films to his name, Adam Elliott has quickly become one of my new favorite filmmakers in the medium, making brilliant animated films for adults that showcase the power of what animation can do as a storytelling medium. The kind that show that animation is cinema. Films like this are the kind that animation is cinema people should be seeking out, if they actually watched more than what comes out of the mainstream studios, which, like that's ever gonna happen. But that's a discussion for another time. Number 4. There are only 3 words that I can use to describe my number 4 pick. Let's fucking go! Deadpool and Wolverine was the most pure fun that I had at the movies this year. Seeing it for the first time on its opening Thursday was one of the greatest movie experiences of my life. I haven't felt a crowd this enthusiastic since Spider-Man No Way Home. And even after the studio switch, it delivers everything I go into a Deadpool movie hoping for, with bloody violence and nasty jokes, but they always surprise me that I'm as engaged in these films on an emotional level. The major themes of this movie are that of legacy, finding a greater purpose, and overcoming failure and grief. The action sequences are unforgettable, as Marvel Studios did not hold back for their first R-rated film, with so much gleefully gory violence. The opening credits especially had me in hysterics. That scene is the reason why Bye 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 made it to my Spotify Rap Top 5. Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman are perfect together in this, and clearly having the time of their lives making it. It's a classic buddy comedy dynamic, and both of them supply the movie's greatest strengths, as Reynolds delivers on the humor and the laughs, while Jackman gives the film an emotional center. And of course, there is one of the biggest talking points of the movie that added to the awesomeness of the experience, and that is the guest appearances. They're all utilized very well, as they're not just there for cheap nostalgia bait, they actually play vital roles in the story. This movie is a massive tribute to Fox's Marvel films and 2000 superhero films in general. It was a beautifully done send-off to a messy but important era for superhero films. They may have been all over the place in quality, I should know after doing a massive video on them, but these films do have their place in comic book movie history. Knowing the nature of Deadpool, I went into this expecting it to be Deadpool moving to the MCU and giving the finger to Fox, but it was actually way more sincere than I was expecting. The movie could have been 2 hours of Deadpool going, "Suck it, Fox, I'm going to Disneyland," and still be fun, but I'm glad that they took the direction they did, especially with that very sweet montage in the end credits. And when it comes to the guest characters, one of my educated wishes that got fulfilled was Chris Evans. Not as Captain America, but as Human Torch, and his role was as hilarious as I had hoped. All of the players of the Resistance group are awesome, and each play a role in redeeming their legacies. After having not great materials to work with in her initial outings, Jennifer Gardner finally gets to shine as Elektra and has some badass moments in action. Wesley Snipes returning as Blade was a massive surprise, and it's awesome that he's here because his Blade was the first big one that helped get Marvel into the cinematic world. I wish that Daphne Keane returning as Laura wasn't spoiled. I didn't watch the final trailer, but I found out through a headline that Keane was pulling an Andrew Garfield on us. And just like in Logan, she supplies some of the movie's most heartfelt moments. But I saved the best and most hoped for cameo for last, and one that I hoped for in my X-Men video. I still wish that Channing Tatum Gambit movie got made. Really crossing my fingers that he makes a cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine. Finally getting to see Channing Tatum as Gambit was awesome, as he kicks so much ass in action and his exaggerated Cajun accent is perfect. I can quote any line from this film on the back of my hand, and "Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here," is one of the many lines I'll never get tired of saying. This is yet another reason why I don't think the MCU has fallen off. I'm not at all falling off from the franchise, but I am falling off from the discourse because of how boring and predictable it is. Everybody just keeps flip-flopping on it with every single project. And everyone loves focusing on that negativity, and that's what the algorithm thrives on. So it feels like any acclaimed post-Endgame MCU project gets immediately forgotten about when a lesser received one gets released. And then when the next acclaimed one comes out, it's called the best Marvel movie since Endgame, which means to me about as much as when a good DC movie gets called the best since The Dark Knight. Because I guess now to the internet, No Way Home, Wakanda Forever, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and several of the shows just never happened. And I would not be surprised if Deadpool and Wolverine will become the next addition to that list the next time that this happens. and that experience will not change. It's raunchy, it's violent, it's hysterical, it's surprisingly poignant, it's fucking Deadpool and Wolverine. Number 3. Where do I even begin with this? Dune Part 2 is such a gargantuan beast of an epic that honestly speaks for itself. I already adored Part 1, but Part 2 broke the scale. It is a landmark cinematic achievement and Denis Villeneuve's magnum opus. The second that the credits rolled, I was speechless and felt like I just witnessed a new standard and the next epic franchise in the making. If I could describe Dune Part 2 in one word, it's more. More action, more breathtaking visuals. It's more visceral, powerful, darker, not afraid to get weird, even at times fun with some surprising humor sprinkled in there. The visuals in this are breathtaking, from all the different ways that the Arrakis deserts look at the different times of day, to the Harkonnen's black and white world of Gedi Prime, and those worms look just as incredible as ever. And I'm not just talking about the funny popcorn bucket either. And the sound design is equally as incredible, with another epic score by Hans Zimmer. And like in the first film, when I hear the female choir in Paul's theme, I get chills and I feel like I've ascended to the heavens of cinema. The entire cast is pitch perfect and everybody gives their all. I already like Timothée Chalamet a lot, but the power and command he brings to this part of Paul Atreides' journey made me go, whoa. And some actors who are only in the first for a little bit really get to shine here. Zendaya is fantastic as Chani, and the way her relationship with Paul progresses over the course of the film is really fascinating. And Javier Bardem also really surprised me in his expanded role as Stilgar, as he provides some of the humor in helping Paul learn the ways of the Fremen and spawned all the biggest memes of the movie. I mean, who can't forget Lisa Gabe? And the new characters are equally fascinating. Florence Pugh is an intriguing presence as Princess Irulan, plus it's awesome to see a Little Women reunion with her and Timmy. And then there is Austin Butler as Fade Routha. He is an absolute menace and an intimidating presence every time he's on screen, and this is another further example of his vocal range. I kinda want to see him do a voice role with an unrecognizable performance like Robert Pattinson's in The Boy and the Heron, because he's got a comparable voice range. We're going to be talking about Dune Part 2 for a long time. It's one of the best sci-fi films ever made, it's one of the best sequels ever made, and it's one of the best films of 2024. Number 2. It was really hard for me to pick between my top 2. These two were neck and neck throughout the entire year. I'd even say my top 4 with these, Dune, and Deadpool were all neck and neck for my pick for the best of the year. But if I had to pick just one, which we'll get to in a bit, then my runner-up of 2024 is... The original Inside Out is not just one of my favorite Pixar films, but favorite films in general. So of all of Pixar's recent films, this was the one that had a concept that felt open for the possibility for a sequel. And before its release, there was so much high expectations that were placed on the movie, ranging from the high standard that the original film set, to how the industry placed the fate of both Pixar as we knew it and movie theaters in general in the hands of this movie. And it blew away even my expectations. I was expecting it to do very well, but I was not expecting it to become the new highest grossing animated film of all time, by finally taking down the Lion King remake so a true animated film can hold that title. Inside Out 2 is not only a more than worthy sequel to the original, but also turned out to be Pixar's best sequel since Toy Story 3. It builds upon everything that made the first a beloved Pixar classic, it's a natural progression of its themes, and it expands the world of Riley's mind in highly imaginative ways. One of the things I really love in this one is how much more we get to see of Riley. I know that sounds weird to say because these movies are about her, But what I mean is that we get to see more of her as a character outside of her emotions, and I was as invested in her story at hockey camp, her struggles with transitioning into high school, her friends going to different schools, and wanting to impress the cool girl and fit in with her friend group. It tackles puberty very well, and in its own distinct way that distinguishes itself from Turning Red. While Turning Red was more direct about puberty and is more about the physical transformation of it, Inside Out 2 is more about the mental aspect of puberty as our minds develop with more new emotions and all of our emotions being more on edge than ever before. If the first was about how sadness is a valuable emotion in our lives, then this film is about how anxiety can take over to such an extreme that you can't be kind to yourself with a strive for perfection that ultimately does you more harm than good. Inside Out, more than any other Pixar film, is one of their greatest displays of their visual creativity, and the sequel pushes that even further. Like any Pixar sequel, you can see how much the technology has progressed in the time gap since their predecessors. And even though it's only set a year after the first, you can see how much has changed in Riley's mind since, with its world building and some of the new areas of her mind like the newly created sense of self. I've said many times that the first has some of the most perfect casting I've ever seen in an animated film, and this is no exception to Pixar's top-notch casting. Amy Poehler is just as fantastic as ever as Joy, as she has so many fantastic lines in this as the new emotions push her to her limits. And she has what I think is the most relatable line of the year.
Delusional? Of course I'm delusional! Do you know how hard it is to stay positive all the time when all you folks do is complain, complain, complain? Jiminy mother loving toaster strudel!
She is literally me, for real. The new emotions are fantastic, but the star of the film has to be anxiety. The movie tackles the subject of anxiety extremely well, as it's not portrayed as an evil that must be suppressed. Like the themes that were established in the first, every emotion matters. Anxiety is technically the antagonist of the film, but she is absolutely not a villain. It's clear from the start that she has good intentions and wants what's best for Riley, but she takes things way too far, and that anxiety grows so much that it makes all of her decisions. I just love everything about her, from her arc, her frantic cartoonish animation, her Muppet-like design, and especially Maya Hawke's brilliant performance. There's been a bunch of times, especially this year, where I saw so much of myself in anxiety. I really like to overplan, maybe a little too much. I get way too worried about the things that could happen, and to be perfectly honest, I was at some of my lowest lows mentally this year, as there was a period for a couple months that I just had monthly panic attacks. So a film like this exploring the subject in a sensitive way gave me some comfort this year. It's because of films like Inside Out 2 why I love Pixar more than any other film studio. They make films that tell emotionally resonant and personal stories, they push the boundaries of what animation can do, and they are fun for all ages as both kids and adults can get some enjoyment from their movies. It's a reminder to everyone why Pixar are the masters at what they do. Number 1. Every year when I do these videos, when I think about what my favorite film of the year is, I don't just think about its craftsmanship on a filmmaking level, but always about which film really connected with me on a personal and especially emotional level. Some really came close, yet this was the one where after seeing it, I knew that this was my number 1 favorite film of 2024. And that film is I remember when this film was announced, and everything about it sounded like it was exactly my kind of movie. Any sci-fi animated film will always have my attention, but the biggest reason I was so excited for it was because this was the latest film from one of my favorite filmmakers, Chris Sanders. His films are some of my all-time favorites, with his ability to craft stories with a ton of heart and a distinct sense of humor that make his films stand out no matter which studio he's working with. He and one of his directing partners, Dean DeBlois, made my favorite Disney and DreamWorks films with Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon respectively, Both are big favorites amongst my family, especially since Lilo and Stitch is maybe the most quoted movie amongst my family. And with a track record like that, I'll always be excited for anything he does, and this being his grand return to animation and to DreamWorks made me excited. And when it comes to DreamWorks, let's just say their history is very interesting, especially these past couple years. For the 30 years they've been around, they've been described by many as hit or miss and inconsistent, but I've grown to see their work as having variety. I think there's been a ton of misconceptions about DreamWorks in the animation community, but this year proved that DreamWorks discussion online was at its absolute worst. It really showed how much the animation community takes anything that they don't like to such an extremely personal level, and anything positive just never gets that much attention. I never really saw any positive reviews of The Wild Robot or Orion in the Dark get anywhere near as much attention as any copy-pasted rant about Kung Fu Panda 4, or especially Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, which, again, is a glorified pilot to a streaming show, not a true sequel. So I'm just gonna leave it here. Blaming DreamWorks Animation proper for Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate is like blaming Walt Disney Animation Studios for the direct-to-DVD sequels. Does that make sense? Are we clear? Can we move on? Good. Let's keep it that way. But back onto The Wild Robot, I had a strong feeling that this was going to bring back the appreciation for DreamWorks Animation. And when I saw it opening night, and by the time the credits rolled, I knew I just witnessed something special. The Wild Robot is not only another masterpiece in Chris Sanders' filmography, but also a new peak for DreamWorks Animation. Imagine combining the visual storytelling of WALL-E, the heart of the Iron Giant, and Bambi's beautiful depiction of nature, and you get this. A beautiful story of parenting, survival, community, and kindness. It's the kind of film that inspires you to be a better person, and in the state of the world today, it's the kind of film that we need right now with its themes that represent that of a better future. It starts as a story of finding your place in the world and evolves into a story of the trials and tribulations of parenthood. It's a story that covers the full spectrum of emotions. It supplies a ton of big laughs with so many hysterical lines of dark humor that are very much in line with some of my favorite quotes from Lilo and Stitch. If you thought DreamWorks couldn't possibly top themselves with their stylized animation after The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, then The Wild Robot takes it to another level. Its painterly style is a work of art. You can pause at literally any frame to appreciate the beautiful details on display. The setting of the island and the way it portrays nature is absolutely very reminiscent of Bambi, as its presentation of the snowstorm and the forest fire are both as visually striking as they are frightening. And when combined with Chris Bauer's awe-inspiring score, it is a marvel to watch. And with the combination of the animation and the score, it's a film that hits you right in the feels, as some scenes did get me teary-eyed, especially the migration scene when Roz lets Bright Bill go off. That scene and the other flying scenes gave me that same sense of wonder as the flying scenes in How to Train Your Dragon did. And such a beautiful story is told with a cast of lovable characters brought to life by a phenomenal cast. Lupita Nyong'o is brilliant in anything she's in, and her performance as Roz is no exception. She brings so much life to her performance that gains more emotion as the film progresses, as she becomes more than what her programming designed her to be. And after learning to understand the language of the animals, she begins to understand them as the other actors all supply the film with tons of heart and humor. I don't know what it is with Pedro Pascal, but he is so good at playing dad roles, and Fink is now the latest addition to that long line of this trend. And if I didn't already know beforehand, I would not have recognized him that it was Pedro Pascal. Kit Connor brings a ton of heart as Bright Bill, as he can be both really funny with how awkward he is around his own kind, and his story is the heart of the picture that can also be interpreted as a beautifully done disability metaphor. Catherine O'Hara, Bill Nye, Ving Rhames, Mark Hamill, and Stephanie Hsu are all fantastic in their respective roles. DreamWorks always assembles stellar casts for their films, and this is one of their absolute best casts. The Wild Robot represents another jewel in Chris Sanders' crown, and one of the new pinnacles of DreamWorks animation, ranking alongside films like The Prince of Egypt and How to Train Your Dragon, as displays of what the studio can do, where they can make stories that are as emotionally resonant as they are entertaining. This is such a special film that deserves to be seen and is one that we need right now. It's destined to become one of my new favorites, and that is why The Wild Robot is my number one favorite film of 2024. And that's my list. Be sure to write your own list down in the comments, and follow me on Bluesky, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.